Hammerland. We are going through it movie by movie. It's a long, perilous journey through the thick of night with our companions, Dracula and Frankenstein. And I'm here with my companion, Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. How you doing, sir?
I am doing well, and I'm excited. This is chapter number 3 in this 12-month odyssey.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we're almost to April. This is incredible. I can't even believe it. But let's talk about The Evil of Frankenstein. This is the first of the Frankenstein movies, if I'm correct, that was not directed by Terence Fisher that we're talking about. Is that right? This is by Freddie Francis.
That's correct.
Uh, I don't know much about Freddie Francis, except I feel like I may have seen another film of his.
He definitely has his feet in the genre. He directed quite a bit with Amicus, which is kind of considered Hammer's, offbeat cousin. They did a lot of the anthology series, Tales from the Crypt and from the Tales from the Vault, and then Torture Garden, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, all those little 5 and 6 story anthology pieces.
So they were kind of like collections of. I was going to say they're like little collections of kind of short films, making them Amicus briefs. It's a joke for my lawyer friends out there. Anyway, sorry.
But Freddie Francis also was an esteemed cinematographer, and he's actually better known for that. He's won 2 Oscars. He did the cinematography for Glory, the Denzel Washington, Matthew Broderick Civil War film.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you look up his filmography, his cinematography credits are pretty impressive.
Well, that's something I kind of want to start off with here, because this does not have the same look as the other Hammer films we've talked about, and certainly not the same as the other Frankensteins we've discussed.
Right.
Those very much had the classic bright kind of Hammer color palette in a lot of ways. This has it starts out with a more naturalistic setting. Almost looked like it was filmed in the early 80s. In fact, when we open up on this little village and there's mourners coming out of a hut from where a body has been recently laid to rest, there's a creepy guy snooping around outside. I immediately thought of Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th, which is weird because that actor's name is Howard Gorney, and Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th was Ralph Gorney.
That's right. I'm not going to say there isn't a coincidence.
But it's got a gritty, more naturalistic cast to the atmosphere, which I thought was very interesting. But I gotta say, overall, I liked this movie, but it's my least favorite Frankenstein out of all. I think it's partially because it seems to have broken the continuity that we've established with the previous films, even though we have Peter Cushing back playing Victor Frankenstein. Now, this is 1964. The previous movie was 58 or something?
Yep.
Is that right? So you may have discussed this on the previous show, but can you fill me in on why there was that gap there?
Well, I think the reason was that they were exploring other options. They were doing, they'd done their werewolf movie, they did their mummy movies. So I think they were kind of working their way through the stable. Revenge of Frankenstein was very much kind of the idea of capitalizing on what was hot. And, like Curse of Frankenstein had been a huge hit, so it made sense to do another Frankenstein film. But I think they were just kind of like stretching their wings, their vampire wings, if you will, and seeing what else they could get away with. And then it came time to, let's do another Frankenstein movie. And this was in the mid 60s. And I would say that Hammer was doing well, but they were starting to kind of crest in terms of their popularity. So it might have made sense for them to do a tried and true formula. This is also the first time that they were working with Universal on one of their Frankenstein films. And that, as you probably noticed, there are quite a few things that are pulled from the Universal Frankenstein franchise.
I did not notice because, as we'll discover later this year, or we're about to discover now, I've never seen the original Frankenstein or Dracula. So I think we'll have
Oh
to
my.
talk about those maybe during a scarathon coming up.
Yes, I think
Uh,
that's a good idea. Well, there are several eagle-eyed viewers who are familiar with the Universal Frankenstein series will notice, hey, that's from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Hey, that's from Bride of Frankenstein. And hey, that's from the original Frankenstein. Um, because they were working with Universal for the first time, the restrictions that were originally placed on the Frankenstein series with Hammer were lifted. They had access to not only the creature design, you'll notice the flat forehead and the kind of huge hulking Karloff-like visage on our creature. But that was also kind of what had made Hammer's Frankenstein special, was that they were steering so far clear of Universal and their lawyers that they kind of created their own thing. And I think that's part of why this installment does not go down as well with a lot of people, is that it is kind of trying to being both Hammer and Universal. It's carrying forward, Peter Cushing, but the continuity is not there. It references an earlier episode that never occurred in our, we didn't see this in Curse of Frankenstein. We didn't see it. It's like, when did this happen? It's kind of this strange kind of pastiche of Hammer and Universal. And I think it's a little bit of an uneasy mix at times. And I also feel like there are times producer Anthony Hines did the screenplay, and it's the first of the Frankensteins that Jimmy Sangster did not write. So, it feels like there are definitely new cooks in the kitchen on this one. And I don't know if the souffle rises.
Very well put. Yeah, I didn't get the references to the other films. I think the only earlier Universal horror of this particular group that I've seen is Bride of Frankenstein, a movie I absolutely love. But in terms of nods, I didn't really pick up on them. I did get the sense that the flashback to the original monster's origin cribbed a lot from the Universal movie, just because that's so much part of pop culture. It's kind of hard to
Sure.
miss. But I did. It was just weird because at the end of Revenge of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein has been, killed and resurrected by his assistant, and they set up shop somewhere in England or the Alps or something. In this movie, he shows up, he's got a young assistant, but it's not the same guy. And he's clearly just, an older version of the living scientist that we've dealt with. So I don't know if it's just because people weren't as obsessive about continuity back then, or there'd been 6 years between episodes. They're like, no one's gonna remember this. It's just make a movie and we won't even address it. But as someone who grew up and is a fan of movies that are interconnected and kind of obsessed with that, these little details just bugged the crap out of me. I thought that the driving heart of this movie was introduced way too late, and that is that in their travels, they encounter Zoltan, a local carny hypnotist, who, I guess this is kind of spoilery, but this is the plot of the movie at some point, hypnotizes the Frankenstein monster and forces him to do his bidding and loses control of the monster. These two different versions of these mad scientists sort of losing control of their creation. It's a great story, but it's introduced way too late.
I agree. I want to kind of just go back to what you were saying about the continuity. The same holds true for the Universal classics. You'll sometimes go, I mean, especially with the Mummy movies, it's very obvious. Like, there's one where I think, like, the Mummy, the Mummy starts off in the previous movie in New England, and the next time you see him, we're down in like Louisiana in the bayou or in Florida. It's like, you're just like, how did he get there? So yeah, there's a lot of continuity, and I think some of the apologists for this one say, well, it's the same as in the Universal films, like there's not continuity there, and all the monster kids should rise up and go, and we hated it. So
Yes.
Like that's not an excuse. We would like you to never do that again, because we are paying attention and we do remember, hey, that didn't happen before. Why is it happening now? Um, yes, I love, and I think that's kind of going the idea of the pastiche. I think there are a lot of interesting ideas going on in Evil of Frankenstein, but I don't know that it fits together as well as we'd like. I think that the character of Zoltan is really interesting, and the concept of even though the brain is physically functioning, that there isn't the life spark of the mind. And I thought that that's a fascinating idea. And they keep kind of exploring different ideas of what it is, what life is throughout the Hammer Frankensteins. And this was kind of like the first time we said, oh, we're not just talking about reanimating dead flesh. We're actually talking about something almost on another level.
And I think that if this movie had even been the second in the series, I probably wouldn't have had that much of a problem with it, because one of the great things about Revenge of Frankenstein is he had learned his lessons about, working with a damaged brain as opposed to, a more pristine, fresh corpse. So in that film, the monster was actually a human being who could communicate and eventually began deteriorating into a monster. Here, it's like, yeah, it's just a basic brain who's easily susceptible to hypnosis. I feel like that's step 2, and then step 3 is the the man is like, oh wait, okay, so he can't be brain damaged. We got to keep hypnotists away. Now we'll just go with a fresh body. So that's, I'm just rewriting an imaginative wish list of my cinema history, but it is something that kind of, another thing that bugged me watching this movie. Like, no, this feels out of place. Even if the continuity is broken, the evolution of the monster just doesn't quite feel right here.
Well, and I would say that um, for the first time, it feels like a copy of a Frankenstein movie.
Mm.
Whereas the first 2 chapters were very kind of innovative. It was a different version of Frankenstein than we had seen before. And this feels like, oh, it's the one where Frankenstein assembles a dead body from different parts, and it looks like this, and it has rampages and kills things, and you're just kind of like, this feels like an imitation of a Frankenstein movie instead of kind of doing your own thing, trusting your own vision. And that's where I think this one gets into trouble, is that it both borrows heavily from Universal while also introducing this concept of the hypnotist. It's like, and I do I also feel like, and tell me what your feelings on this are, but the idea that our Baron Frankenstein here has a very different temperament than we have seen in the past.
He is a lot more playful, and there's something about the tone of this movie that's just off, because there's a bit of, this might precede what I'm talking about, but it felt almost like an Adam West Batman in some places, particularly, especially just obviously because there's a scene where he and his assistant Hans are going through a village. They're going through his original stomping grounds where he got run out of town for creating this monster. They go through it to get back to the old castle, which is abandoned, so they can reset up shop because there's been enough time. But if they go through the village, they're going to be spotted. So there's a carnival going on. They put on these silly eye masks and go into a bar, and other kinds of crazy stuff happens. But it's so wacky. There's a scene where the burgomaster, who's the the head cop in the town, of course I couldn't stop thinking about the burgomaster Meisterburger, but he's like trying on a striped nightcap, but he's trying to get it just right. And I think there's like this kooky sitcom crinkle music playing, as he's adjusting it, and his sexy wife is like, "Oh, come to bed." I'm like, what is this movie? But as far as Frankenstein's temperament, you hit the nail on the head, because the first 2 movies, Curse of Frankenstein, Revenge of Frankenstein, you realize they're talking about Victor Frankenstein. Those movies about the guy who made the monster. There's a very focus on there's a heavy focus on his psychology. This movie, The Evil of Frankenstein, it feels more like they're focused on the monster of Frankenstein. The scientist takes a back seat, and it isn't until the very end where you can really see his struggle and some more of the drama coming into it. But by then he's spoiler alert, getting blown up with his creation. Like it's too late. Just like the introduction to the hypnotist. If you had established the hypnotist earlier and had two of these raging egomaniacs, people at the top of their field going at it for control of this new Superman, I think that would have been really special. But yeah, Frankenstein, as played by Peter Cushing, really well. He's the best with this material that he can. It kind of melds into the background of all this other nonsense.
Well, and yes, I mean that's the character of Frankenstein isn't even the lead in his own movie, but I feel like that the character, what the character is asked to do, does not feel consistent with the Frankenstein that we've come to know. He gets really snippy about when he sees the burgomaster's wearing his ring, and it's like he like loses his mind and starts making accusations when he's trying to keep a low profile, and that just doesn't feel like the Frankenstein we've come to know. He also says, I mean, again, I fault the screenwriter more than Cushing, because they also say, well, we can't go right to the chateau because that'd be the first place they'd look for us. Well, 15 minutes later, they're hauling the monster to the chateau. And it's like, wait, didn't you just say and like Cushing or Frankenstein says, well, we can't be seen. We can't be seen. Oh, well, I'll just wander through town and make a great ass of myself and, keep a low profile.
Right. I mean, I like the idea, the way they establish how they're going to get into town, because they're on the outskirts and Hans is like, wait, we're going back there. There's no way. And he says, well, yeah, it's broad daylight, but it's noon. Everyone's going to be out working in the fields or whatever. So we can stroll right through town. Turns out there's a carnival going on, but yeah, fine. Use the opportunity to blend in with the other traffic, get to your chateau, and maybe go out for drinks at night.
Yeah.
Because there is something weird about going into this bar. And you're absolutely right. I don't mind the freak out over the fact that the Burgermeister is wearing Frankenstein's ring. In fact, I think that's a cool idea. The concept that this crazy scientist was run out of town on a rail, leaving his castle, and everybody kind of went in and took all the cool stuff that they wanted because he was a fabulously wealthy baron, right? But freaking out over the ring, that should have been Hans. They should have established that Hans was his Igor all those years ago, and they both got run out of town. So he could be like, he's got your ring. That's not right. And then Frankenstein's like, shut up.
Right. It just, like I say, it felt inconsistent. And that was one of the things that again, the consistency, it feels like we go back and we create a laboratory scene that never existed just so we could have a laboratory scene that's like the one in Universal. Remember how you like that Universal Frankenstein lab scene? Well, here's one kind of like it.
I feel like it was directed by Zack Snyder, because that scene went on for like 40 minutes, I swear. It was just him. The other Frankenstein movies, there's at least a lot going on. We got to see these cool experiments he was doing. He wasn't just flipping switches and smoke coming out of things. In this, it was just flipping switches and smoke coming out of things.
Well, and I feel like we already saw a really cool kind of gory lab sequence at the very beginning where he does the heart, draws out the heart,
pumping it by the hand, yeah,
and then it gets dumped out on the floor. It's like we've already kind of had our obligatory lab sequence. Let's move things along. And we've got this really interesting idea of the hypnotist. Why don't we get on to that? I want to take a minute to talk about that actor. I think he's I really enjoyed Peter Woodthorpe. Like he seems like he's a match for Frankenstein in a way that other authority figures or other antagonists have not been.
He does have that feeling of being a supervillain who's content to just go from town to town with his little traveling carny act and not even necessarily rip people off, because it feels like he's there to put on a show.
Yeah,
but he's also brilliant at it. So when he gets this opportunity to really come up with a big score, he's going to bring all of his powers to bear, and they're considerable powers. I mean, Jesus, what would have happened if he had tried to hypnotize Dr. Frankenstein? I'm surprised he didn't try and do that. And it would have been great if Cushing had waved him off like, your mind tricks don't work on me.
From the first Star Wars movie, which Cushing was in.
Yes.
And I do want to talk about Katie Wilde, our deaf mute servant girl.
Yeah, she's referred to as beggar girl.
Right. I mean, the hair on her head is of a color that never existed in the natural world. And it's kind of like, I don't understand this choice. But beyond that, I feel like she is really trying to give a performance, but is given nothing to do. I feel like she is a really capable performer. I find her, uh, she's really engaging both as a character, and she's not hard on the eyes, as is the way with Hammer Women. But she's just there to be there. Like, well, we need to have a token female in here. Let's not give her any lines. Let's make her really bad at charades, and she can just be there to be sexually harassed by I forget, sorry, by
Zoltan.
Zoltan, sorry.
Yeah.
Xandor
No,
is somebody else.
I kept thinking of Zoltan because I think that's the machine that Josh
It is.
Baskin uses in Big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she is literally just meant to be seen and not heard in this movie. The only out I can give the creators of the film is that maybe they wanted to do something a little different than just having the typical kind of woman who has showed up in these movies before, without making her a central like character who's driving the plot forward, because that's not gonna happen, unfortunately. But it is a good performance, but it is also very odd. It is a nice companion to the Hans character, who has a very complicated relationship to Dr. Frankenstein and to the audience, frankly. It's something else that threw me off, because the previous assistant in the last movie definitely had malicious intent and was an acolyte of Frankenstein. This guy seems pure of heart in that he wants to know, he wants the knowledge to just expand his understanding of humanity. Whereas I get the feeling that he's content to be the assistant and let Frankenstein do all the dark, dirty work.
Yeah.
He also is, he's the guy who kind of gets the girl in the end. So he's a protagonist, but he's also the henchman of the villain, which I thought was a great dynamic. Again, something that gets thrown away. You realize it in the last 5 minutes of the movie when you realize all the other cool stuff that you could have been watching for an hour and 20 minutes.
Well, yeah, the irony that this is the evil of Frankenstein, and it's probably the least evil, overtly evil that Frankenstein is. To talk to your point, actually, Frankenstein created woman. Our next chapter, we do have a female that really does take the film and is the ostensible lead. It's
Really?
another film where Frankenstein kind of takes a supporting role, but it's handled much differently and a little more sure of hand.
Now, don't give it away, but because I'm imagining Frankenstein created woman and how the titles have been kind of playful in some of these movies. Is she like a protege, or is this literally like their version of The Bride of Frankenstein?
I'm not saying a darn thing.
Because I'm liking this protege idea, and I'm going to be disappointed if it's not. And if it's not, I'm just going to petition to make a female protege of Frankenstein movie.
Well, I mean, technically, and we'll get to this, in the next installment, but it was a play on Roger Vadim's And God Created Woman, which had come out, I think, the year before.
And was remade with Rebecca De Mornay and Vincent Spano in the early 80s.
Correct. See, he knows his movies, folks.
Never seen it. I just remember passing by it on cable when I was way too young.
Like, I would watch that if Mom. Anyway, back to the Evil of Frankenstein, which is not nearly as interesting as talking about the Rebecca De Mornay remake of And God Created Woman. And then, I think much like I read an interview where Freddie Francis was talking about, what attracted him to the movie. And it was the idea of, or rather what attracted him to doing a remake, essentially, of the Universal, is that, you had a sympathetic monster. And I feel like Kiwi Kingston, who is the New Zealand wrestler who takes on the creature's boots this time around, he lacks the nuance and performance that, Karloff lent to the role. Karloff was absolutely an actor first. And it feels like Kingston was hired for his size and for his physicality. And so he's good at, throwing himself around and throwing other things around. But in terms of actually communicating pathos, I feel like he comes up a little short. And I don't think the movie does him any favors. The movie doesn't really give him that many opportunities.
I wanted to talk about this monster. I'm glad you brought it up. Not having been familiar with the Universal version, but of course seeing, Karloff as an icon for my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of get the idea of the flat square head, but this looked like he had a damn UPS box paper mache to his skull.
Yep.
And the look, I couldn't get Peter Boyle in Young Frankenstein out of my head watching this entire thing, except if he had like bad splotches of putty all over him. What's going on with this monster? Was he built from other people, or was he just drawn up and pasted together?
Or was he built from a UPS box? We may never know. I mean, yes, it's a very crude kind of. Again, that's why I feel like it feels like it's a Frankenstein film wannabe, because it looks like a cheap version of the Karloff. It's like it looks like a kid's Halloween costume, and you go, well, and I know the makeup man. Remind me, have you seen The Curse of the Werewolf?
No.
Okay. Because Roy Ashton did the makeup for that, and he's also the one responsible for the makeup here. And Roy Ashton was often tasked with creating creature makeups on the fly. Like, they'd be like, we're shooting next week. What do you got for us? And he's like, wait, what? And so while the blame kind of falls at his feet in terms of this creature design, I'm also kind of knowing that he probably had like 2 minutes and about $4 to come up with it.
Yeah, I mean, those kind of behind the scenes stories always break my heart. They also break my narrative. I'm like, what are they thinking? Well, I guess he was doing what he could, but in the end, you still have to look at this as a movie. And I feel like even under those situations, and this might be a little bit postmodern for what I'm about to, for the context we're talking about, at least have maybe Hans or something look at the monster and be like, kind of looks weird. Like, what is this? And it's like,
Yeah.
I had to throw it together with what I had. We were moving castles.
Right. It'd be like, I was 4 years old at the time. Give me a break, Hans. But yeah, I mean, I think again, it kind of speaks to its own, kind of second class status. It doesn't feel as polished as the previous two installments. It feels like it's the cheaper version of it. And it's unfortunate that they felt like they had to borrow from Universal simply because they could.
So what was aside from, I assume, money and the lack of restrictions, what was the benefit of partnering with Universal?
Well, I think, the benefit was that you, again, had no restrictions, but Hammer always needed a U.S. distributor. So, because they didn't distribute the films themselves. So to partner with a major studio was always the idea. And, the fact that they were partnering with Universal kind of meant that Universal was giving them their blessing, and it meant that they would get a wide distribution.
And that makes sense, and I wasn't there for any of these meetings. I haven't read up on the making of it, but it just seems like, yeah, we're in bed now with Universal. They can get us in front of more eyeballs in the Americas. But that doesn't mean you have to use anything that they've done. You could still pretend as if you had those restrictions on you and get really creative. You could even do a different, better version of this story, which I think we've been kind of talking about, instead of getting so hung up in like, wow, we can do this now, focusing on the aesthetics and not the story.
Yeah. And I think they learned their lesson, because they do a pretty sharp U-turn in the other direction with Frankenstein Created Woman and Moving Forward.
Okay.
I think you'll be pleased from here on out. But this is often seen as kind of the misstep along the way, and it's unfortunate that it also was the only time that Terence Fisher didn't direct a Frankenstein film, because it makes it seem like, well, because Freddie Francis took over, it took a nosedive, and Terence Fisher had to come along and save the day. Terence Fisher actually had a pretty serious car accident, and that was why he wasn't available
Mm.
to helm the film. He was slated to direct, but he was incapacitated due to a car accident. And they later in his life he had another car accident, so he might have had something to drink. I don't know.
Well, I just, yeah, I don't know if I've asked you this before, but are there good like Hammer history horror, pardon the alliteration, books that I could check out that cover like specifically the behind the scenes of these movies that we've been talking about? Because I love the history that you're providing for me here, but it just makes me want to know more about what's going on.
I don't want to come up with a incomplete list, so why don't we, next time we meet, I will show up with list in hand.
Okay. Yeah,
I
that'd
know
be
I
great.
have several that I like to pull off the shelf from time to time, but rather than be struggling for titles and authors, I will be more prepared next time.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I hope the viewers do too, because much like with Academia Giallo, which is back in full swing, I guess after one episode. Um,
I
I
wasn't
just
even a giallo, by the way.
Mhm. I like this continuing education into the genre, because I feel like I've lived, well, I'm middle aged, knock on wood, without having really dived into these movies and getting to see them and experience them as if I was 15, but with the
Mhm.
knowledge and the film critic snobbishness of a 43-year-old man. But that's the other thing is, we may have talked about this. I kind of overlooked these movies because I thought they were weird and they weren't the Universal movies, which I hadn't watched anyway. So I thought they were kind of off-brand horror. Boy, did I have no idea. This is even with my critic's brain on, I'm finding so much to enjoy and to think about how it compares much more favorably to a lot of other stuff that's come in its wake that I've wasted my time on.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the thing is, like, we were, when this movie came out, it was 64. So Hammer had a 6-year run as kind of like the kings of horror. And so, they would, their decline was, only another, 6 to 8 years away. So this is kind of them at their sweet spot, and you'll start to see them kind of taking bigger swings, and some of those are hits and some of them are misses. But it's a really interesting time, and I look forward to kind of talking further with you about not just the Hammer and Dracula's, but kind of the other things that Hammer was doing along the way.
Now, you've seen the slate of what we're talking about. We're essentially covering all of the Hammer Frankensteins and Draculas this year. Um, how many misses versus how many hits do we have coming up here?
I would say that, I mean, the Hammer Frankenstein's, you've got six.
Well, yeah,
Well, we're
just
doing
just
seven.
don't tell me which ones. I'm just looking for
No, no,
a
no.
number. Okay.
We've got seven films because we're doing horror Frankenstein as well. And I would say that of those, there's only one real miss, and that's this one. And this one's not even, again, it's not a total disaster. It's just not up to the same quality. I feel like most of the rest of them, uh, there's maybe one more that kind of lands in that not great, but I feel like the others are good to great.
Well, that's really encouraging because if this is the quote unquote worst one, I really like this movie. It's just that I
Mm,
love the other movies that we've talked about. And I watched this in sort of a weird manner. I watched it last night the entire thing. And then this morning I woke up and watched the last 15 minutes because I had started to nod off. And there was a part of my brain as I was in that, sleep, falling to sleep mode, I was convincing myself of things that weren't true. I'm like, okay, they're fighting again. Okay, he's ripping up a lab again. Okay, there's an explosion again. I feel like I've seen this a million times. This movie's terrible. I woke up in the morning not really being able to piece together the sequence of events
Hmm.
to my satisfaction where I'd be able to talk about them. So I went back and I rewatched and I had a completely different assessment of what was going on. It's still not great, but there is a bit more nuance than I'd given it credit for. Like when Cushing does, not to bring it back to Star Wars, but there's that great, he's up on the platform in his lab and he swings, he grabs a chain and swings into action into the flames to, I don't know if he was trying to rescue his monster at that point and the flames just overwhelmed him, or if he was just resigned to die. I feel like it was a rescue gone bad because he was such an egotist. I can't imagine him throwing away his life
Yeah,
versus just starting over again in another town.
yeah. I feel like you're right. I think he was trying to save his monster, and save his life's work, as it were. But yeah, I do like that. Again, we see Frankenstein as a man of action. He's riding the carriage, through the mob, and although, pardon me, this jumped out at me, but like there was another guy, at least one other guy on horse, and it's like, why didn't you chase after him? I mean, like, what happened there? Here's another one that caught me. Sorry, I just have to, because I just remembered this. So they take after the fair, they take a long time hiking up the mountain that they eventually find the creature in. And then they decide they're going to carry this giant creature back down the mountain that took them all day. I mean, like his buddy Hans is like, oh, I have to stop. I'm exhausted. And it's like, oh, but we're going to carry this giant 300-pound monster dead weight back down the mountain. Great. Good plan.
Well, before that, and maybe there was a lot of greenery around that I just didn't catch, but they discover the monster inside this cave, frozen in ice. I'm sorry, it was cellophane. Like, I appreciate they were trying to make the most of what they had, but
Yeah.
when Beggar Girl leads them into this room, or he discovers her there, she's looking at like an ice formation, and then he looks up and he sees something amazing. He's like, Hans, quick! And Hans comes in. Then we see what he sees, and it's Frankenstein suspended in ice because when they were run out of town earlier, he had been shot by the villagers and fallen off a mountain to never be seen again. He was, I guess, caught in some water that froze over, so he's in this mountain.
He must have fallen into the glacier, says Hans.
Yeah, which why wouldn't he just make a giant splat onto the glacier? I don't think that's how water and ice works, but what do I know? I'm not a mad scientist. But in order to free him, they get a whole bunch of wood and they start this giant like bonfire in the cave.
Yep.
Where did that all come from?
Who knows?
But I did like the effect of, even though he's clearly in plastic wrap, they were running like little rivulets of water through it so you can see that it's melting. It's cheesy, but it's inventive.
I appreciated the theatricality of it for sure. And that is a direct lift from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, by the way.
Oh.
In Universal. That's where they find the Frankenstein monster. He is frozen in ice. And you're like, oh, I feel like I've seen this before. Oh, wait, I have.
Yeah, there's a lot of, because I don't know what the time span is from, say, when they first move into the castle where the lab is. Well, the castle's been ransacked, and I assume the lab was, it was pretty sparse, and there was a couple of beakers laying around, but eventually they're back full up and running. How long did it take to do that? Especially, it's not like you can order this stuff from Amazon. You have to get it, and people are going to notice, you're buying beakers in town.
Exactly. And wait, you look a lot like that Frankenstein guy buying beakers and electrical equipment. And also, did it bother you? Because it bothered me. The lab is in the basement this time instead of upstairs like it is in Curse of Frankenstein. I was like, dang it. Because we both commented on how cool it was that it was upstairs and not downstairs.
I'm going to put another splinter in your brain. When we see the castle explode, or the estate, it explodes from the top. It
Yep.
doesn't get blown out of the bottom and the top kind of like falls with it. It's clearly up top.
Yep.
So I don't know what was
Yep.
going on there.
And also I'm like, wait, what is this? Not part. This was a separate part of the chateau. When did that happen? Yeah,
It was
there's a lot of things where I feel like just nobody was connecting all the dots. It's like, you know what? It's just as easy to get it right, guys.
It really is. And that's why I just feel like they were so geeked out over the whole Universal connection that they're like kind of like the monster makeup. Like, we need a script next week. What?
We've only got 60 minutes. Okay, throw a hypnotist in there. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that hypnotist thing, that really bugs
Well,
me because it's such a
and,
good
and the
opportunity.
hypnotist, and I feel like he is also someone who that character is not, it's well played, it's not well drawn
Yeah.
because, like he's like, I want you to punish the burgomaster and the chief of police, and it's like, not killed, not killed. It's like, what? He's a monster. What did you think was going to happen, buddy? And then it's like, I'm going to rape this beggar girl. Why should I waste myself on such trash? You're like, what is even happening right now?
I don't know. And that sexual assault that you just mentioned there, it was that just speaks to this weird power play because he could have just done a Dracula and like seduced her,
Right,
i-
sure.
into it, I guess. But I'm glad that I was kind of shocked when that scene started to happen. I'm like, we're not really going here. I mean,
Right.
I know Hammer is edgy, but this just seems like in really bad taste, and it
Well,
was.
and
But
also, and that's exactly right. It's like, why, if we're not going to go there, why are we going there? It's like, what is it? Is it just to put our beggar girl, in peril for a second? It just felt really kind of uninspired and unnecessary. So yeah, it was just kind of, it was one more thing for the beggar girl not to do. Like,
and
and she doesn't do anything, and then she's released and she doesn't do anything.
well, to your point about her being terrible at charades, when she's trying to explain that, was it when the monster got loose in the lab or had run away or
Right.
something, she could have just grabbed him and like brought him with, but she's just like, "Ah."
Right. Right. You're like, you're not good at this. I don't know how you've gotten by this far.
Now the other thing that bugged me about her makeup, did she seem kind of green to you?
Yes.
I
Yes.
I felt like
Nobody
it was.
noticed that this time.
Yeah, I thought like maybe they're trying to make it so that she's a beggar, she's out on the street, so she's kind of dirty. But then it almost looked in some scenes like they're trying to darken her skin, like make her a different
Yeah.
ethnicity almost. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. This does not, she almost looks like she came out of Frankenstein's lab, especially with
Well,
the hair.
yeah, I was going to say she looks like an extra on the Munsters.
Ugh. Yeah, so it's a good-ish
I feel like
movie.
there's a lot to nitpick about this movie, and I don't feel like that is the case with a lot of other Hammer efforts. I just feel this one feels a little slapdash, and with a little more time and care, it could have been something special, and instead it becomes kind of the token punching bag for the Hammer Frankenstein folks.
I will say, there's a lot of little great moments and bits of potential in here that kept me hanging on and kind of wishing for better. But one thing I thought was pretty cool was in the first Dracula movie we talked about, where Cushing was going as Van Helsing was going up against Christopher Lee's Dracula, the grabbing the two iron candlesticks to form the cross. I liked that in this movie we established that Frankenstein hates fire. At the
Mm,
end, Cushing grabs the lantern, right, the little gas lantern, and is sort of raising the flames and chasing after him. And there's kind of a standoff. He's like, "I'm not that afraid of you." And then the hypnotist gets involved, and he gets, that was really nice. The nice spear through the heart, because it wasn't like he just got stabbed. I mean, he almost got ran through like the priest and the omen or something. It was
right.
crazy.
No, it was great. That was great. I will say that once again, my nitpick brain came up because he's wielding this kerosene lamp and there's kerosene spilling all over the place. I'm like, dude, you are going to catch on fire. And why he didn't catch on fire is beyond me. Because I'm like, you got a live flame, you got kerosene spilling down your lamp here, you're standing in it. This is not good. So,
well, he was sweating a lot. Maybe that counteracted the effect of the kerosene. I don't know.
judges, can I get a ruling on that?
I'm reaching. Well, yeah. Thank you for talking about the Evil of Frankenstein. Again, I feel like this title belonged in another movie because Frankenstein, I think, was much more sinister and evil in the other films. This could almost be the Curse of Frankenstein, especially if you did more with the hypnotist, like the idea of the two people trying to wield power of this monster. But yeah, these are alternate realities we're talking about. What do we have coming up next month? Next month, I think we're talking about a Dracula film, if I remember, because of the chronology.
Dracula Prince of Darkness, 1965, the return, or 66. Christopher Lee returns to the Cape.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to that Frankenstein created woman thing. Is that coming up soon, at least?
I believe that might be the same year or the year after.
Okay, cool. Well, it's going to be a rockin' summer.
It's right around the corner.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Everybody check out his stuff. There'll be links here in the description. If you liked our journey through Hammerland month 3, please like and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications so you can see when we're talking about this next time. And I imagine I still have to set this up, but in the interim, we may be returning to Academia Giallo to talk about, what was this, something, I Am the Key, that Brian kept wanting us to talk about?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
It's a long title, and I can only remember the I Am the Key part of it. So that'll be a teaser.
Your vice is a locked door, and only I have the key. Sergio Martino.
Okay. He'll be happy to know that I am officially deciding that's going to be the next one. So look out for that. Yeah. Yep. All right. Thank you again, sir. Take care, and catch you next time.